Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. And in this update, we are finally going to check out the short-term price action in QNT and see what is exactly happening. But before that, we are going to talk about a very important thing called Trusted Node Program. And at first glance, it sounds pretty self-explanatory. You would think that it means trusted nodes running on Overledger network, but there's actually a lot going on under the hood, and we are going to unpack it. So at its core, the Trusted Node Program is about opening up Overledger Fusion's infrastructure to more and more participants, but, and this is kind of the key, not just anyone and not in a chaotic manner. No, the idea here is to keep things broad, but at the same time still trusted, meaning individuals, institutions, fintechs, whoever, as long as they meet certain requirements, can benefit from Overledger Fusion. This is important because it shows Quant is trying to scale Overledger beyond just a handful of close enterprise partnerships. But it's very important to understand that they still want to keep security, compliance, and institutional standards that serious financial players at the same time demand. So essentially, this is kind of a balancing act, meaning more decentralization and at the same time not at the expense of control and trust, which is kind of the key. Now, let's talk about a couple of the core elements of TNP and why they actually matter. First things first, we need to talk about decentralized control, but at the same time with approval. So they say that approved node operators determine which underlying blockchains to host. They are basically setting up sort of kind of a federated model. It's not fully open like Bitcoin, where anybody can spin up a node anonymously. Instead, node operators have to be KYC'd and approved. Why? Because institutions do not really want to rely on anonymous validators that they cannot trace or audit. But here is the interesting part here. Once you are approved, you still get real autonomy and you decide which blockchains to connect and host on Overledger, which is very, very important. So in effect, it's about a decentralized control, but inside a trusted boundary, which means number one, it is safer for regulated finance. Number two, it avoids a single quant control bottleneck. And number three, it keeps the network adaptive to demand. That kind of middle ground, meaning federated decentralization, is actually pretty damn smart for enterprise and banking use cases. It keeps the door open for growth without really sacrificing compliance, which is very, very good. Now, the second core element of the TNP is flexible onboarding, and they call this BYON and BYOC, meaning bring your own node and at the same time bring your own connector. This is another quietly powerful idea. You see, traditionally adding support for a new blockchain into Overledger might mean waiting for Quant's core dev team to build and test the integration. That slows every single thing down. Now, with BYON and BYOC, basically approved node operators can one, run their own nodes, and two, build and plug their own connectors to new chains. And you might ask, what does that mean in practice? It means the network can scale faster and you don't really need to wait for central updates. It also means that operators can react to real-world demand, meaning if a client wants to use a new permission chain, the operator can integrate it themselves. And also, finally, this creates an ecosystem effect. And technically, this is kind of a big deal because it means that Overledger is not just a simple monolithic product. No, with this solution, Overledger becomes a living, evolving multi-network fabric driven by the community and enterprises who actually use it, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, the third element is granular access control, and according to this tweet, they say it means define organizational and cross-organizational permissions using customizable API key roles and gateway roles. And on the surface, it absolutely sounds dry, but it's actually kind of big. Think about it. Large enterprises aren't one single user. No, they made up of number one, treasury teams, number two, compliance officers, number three, external partners, and number four, possibly different business units, and these teams all need different levels of access. So instead of one master key, Overledger lets you create, for example, custom API apps, maybe something like a read-only API. Another example can be something like can initiate transaction API. Another one can be like can approve transaction API. All of these things are possible. And also Overledger lets you create gateway roles to set exactly what data or networks each role can actually touch. And the question is why this actually matters, because it supports real world workflows like treasury team initiate payments, and then after that compliance team signs that off. TMP completely supports this process. Also, another reason for why this is so important is because it makes Overledger suitable for regulated financial operators, not just some hobby projects. Also, here is another reason. This could potentially turn Overledger from a simple cross-chain tool into a full orchestration layer with enterprise security already baked in, which is kind of the key. This is the kind of thing institutions expect, and without it, I believe that no bank or fintech would even dare to integrate. Now, let's talk about yet another very important core element of the TMP, which is incentivized participation. And here is where it gets kind of interesting from an economic perspective. You see, node operators can stake QNT to get priority for transaction routing. So it's not just run a code and then earn fees. No, there is actually a staking dynamic in here. And for example, operators can lock up QNT and in return, they get better transaction priorities, and they also get rewarded in QNT for reliable uptime and adding new blockchains. And you want to remember that this is actually already built on Quant's earlier work. I think it was like back in 2021 on remote connector gateways. So in my opinion, this is absolutely clever for a couple of reasons. Number one, it creates real demand for QNT. Number two, it makes operators economically motivated to one, keep nodes healthy, and two, expand the network, meaning add more and more blockchains. Reason number three, this turns the layer 2.5 network, aka Overledger Fusion, into a self-reinforcing ecosystem, meaning the more useful that it actually is, the more QNT gets staked and the more secure and scalable the whole network becomes. So again, you want to understand that the token isn't there for speculation alone. It directly supports network security and growth, which is very important. And finally, the last important element of the trusted node program is being open to everyone, but with KYC. Because this part really shows Quant's hybrid approach. They say anybody can participate, enterprises and institutional customers are also invited. So yes, it seems like that even individuals can run trusted nodes if, this is a big if they pass KYC. That means the system is open enough to grow organically and get broad participation, but at the same time, it is still closed enough to keep things safe for institutions and regulated use cases, which is a very important balance to keep. And by the way, in case that you don't know what layer 2.5 is, because in here they talked about it, I actually talked about this subject in another video. So if you want, you can check that. But if you don't want to, basically layer 2.5 means three things: not fully permissionless like classic layer 2s, not fully private and closed either. It means overall a federated semi-open design that fits enterprise crypto where compliance matters, but decentralization and community still add value. This is an unusual design, I understand that, but it might actually be what the real financial world wants. So let's just wrap this up by talking about why this actually matters, not just technically, but also strategically. And in my opinion, they are a couple of very important reasons for why this is going to be such an impactful program, and it's so bullish for QNT. Number one is the fact that with TNP, Overledger stops being a single corporate managed system where QNT HQ decides every single thing. Instead, it actually becomes a decentralized, incentive-driven ecosystem. And that means, number one, operators can decide which chains to add. Number two, node operators get real skin in the game. And number three, growth doesn't really bottleneck around Quant's internal developer team. This is very important, and with it, the network can scale horizontally, meaning more chains, more participants, which will lead to ultimately faster innovation. Reason number two for why this is going to be such an impactful thing. It actually comes down to the fact that based on all the things that we talked about, TNP seems to be built for regulated DeFi, CBDCs, and enterprise blockchains. And I know the moments that I said CBDCs, you probably rolled your eyes, but trust me, traditional finance doesn't really want anonymous validators, okay? They want known, trusted participants, but at the same time, they do kind of want decentralization to reduce single point of failure. This model by decentralized control, but at the same time only among KYC approved nodes, gives them exactly that. And that makes it a beautiful, beautiful practical bridge between DeFi and TradFi. Reason number three for why TNP is so bullish for QNT. It actually drives utility demand for Quant and not in a vague, speculative way. No, QNT in this scenario is used for staking. Number two, paying for access to Overledger APIs. And number three, licensing of enterprise integration. So adoption directly in this scenario translates into lockup tokens and real usage rather than just trading hype. Reason number four, it actually positions QNT in a very, very unique spot. Why is that? Because with TNP, you are not fully permissionless like classic crypto layer ones. On the other hand, you are also not fully closed like Bank Consortium, but this is a regulator-ready, scalable, decentralized interoperability fabric. There aren't many projects aiming for this middle ground, and trust me, this is actually what big institutions want and need to bring real-world assets, CBDCs, and tokenized finance on chain. So let's have our final conclusion for this part. The Trusted Node program is classic QNT because it tries to bridge worlds between open and closed systems, between DeFi and TradFi, and between indie developers and giant banks. And it does this without really giving up scalability, security, and compliance. QNT in this scenario is the real glue that holds every single thing together. In short, this isn't just some technical upgrade. No, it seems to be a very, very thoughtful and at the same time beautiful laid out design that could realistically make Overledger Fusion the go-to infrastructure for connecting permissioned and permissionless blockchain worldwide. And I'll be honest with you, I'm gonna have a really, really hard time believing that despite the fantastic fundamentals of QNT, if we are going to have an alt season in this cycle, which I do kind of believe that we are going to have. By the way, if you have any doubts about the concept of the altcoin season itself, definitely feel free to check out the previous QNT video and then come back to this update. But just know this, I believe that we're gonna have an alt season, and in it, big projects like QNT are going to absolutely shine. So overall, fantastic news for Quant. It seems like that we are 100% on the right track. But what about the live chart? You see, in the mid to long term, based on the previous video, I still believe everything is set up for a magnificent bull run for the next, I don't know, let's say like the 6 months to about a year and a half. But in the short term, okay, we can consider many different possibilities. If you remember, the last time that we talked about Quant, we were actually right around here. And the idea was that, look, this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wave up, followed by that, most likely we are going to have an ABC zigzag. And well, this means in QNT, we can expect yet another 5 wave on the upside. And back then, we didn't actually have this move. So now I'm going to adjust some waves. Okay, the end of our wave 1 is in here. This is our wave 2, and then probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wave up into wave 3 to about this point. Correction for 4, and yet another move up into wave 5 to around the, yes, the highest high is right in here. Now, here's the situation. I still have my doubts about whether this means that our final low is in or not. Why is that? You see, if you want to say that we have hit our final low, maybe somewhere around here, then okay, you need to be able to find off of the lowest low a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wave up. This specific example is an impulse. Rules for it are, we should not have overlapping of the waves between wave 2 and 4, and in any kind of 5 wave, wave 3 should not be the smallest wave. And in terms of the sub waves, 5 up into wave 1, 3, and 5, there we go. And for wave 2 and 4, we can have many different counts. It's not really that important. Let's say, sure, WXY into wave 2, and yep, okay, an A, B, C structure into wave 4. Also, here's the deal. Sometimes instead of a 5 wave in your bounce back, you can have a correction structure. And in this scenario, I want to talk about an ABC. And for the sub waves, it's quite clear. 5 wave up into a correction for wave B. Let's say ABC this time, and yet another 5 wave up into our ceiling. And pay attention to this. Even if you want to say that we are having a 5 wave, until somewhere around these areas, you either have a 1, 2, 3, or maybe the subwaves for an ABC zigzag. In other words, to somewhere around here, you don't really have a clear understanding of whether the final low is already in or not. And that, my friends, is the exact situation that we are in right now in like very short term in QNT's price chart. Because question, is this a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe it's actually a simple A, B, C zigzag? Well, again, I'm going to say it, at the moment, we really do not have a clear answer. But having said all that, I do see kind of optimistic signs in like very short term. Why is that? You see, this seems to be quite a strong move on the upside. So I'm hoping that this is going to be, excuse me, like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then after it, we get something like an A, B, C zigzag. And then we get yet another move on the upside in order to take this side. If we get something like this, it can actually be a very bullish sign for us, because at that point, who knows, we may end up having from this point a 1, 2, and then big 5 up into wave 3, correction for 4, another move into wave 5, which on a higher degree, that is actually going to be into a wave 3, correction for 4, and yet another move up into wave 5, meaning the final low is already in. What I do not want to see in like very short term in QNT is a rather strong move down, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, without a lot of overlapping of the waves, potentially from the current point, in order to take this important low down here about $96.50. Why is that? Because if we do take this low at that point, it is going to be kind of confirmed that we are having indeed an ABC in here and not an impulse, meaning, well, unfortunately, our move down is not over. So as long as you are not seeing a strong move down from the current point, or maybe like just a bit higher, generally before we take this important high, about, let's say, $111, you can be kind of optimistic. But should you be like 100% optimistic and say the low is already in with a lot of confidence, I think at the moment it is like way too soon to jump into those kinds of bullish conclusions. And by the way, I think if we get yet another move up, everybody and their mothers are going to potentially talk about this beautiful head and shoulder structure, which, if you want to go according to it, the target for it is going to be the height of our pattern from here to about this point. And is our chart on regular? No, it isn't. Let's just measure it now. There we go. And you need to put this thing at your breaking point. This is giving you like a $140 QNT. It is possible, do not get me wrong, but again, let's not jump ahead of ourselves. Let's just take everything step by step and focus right now only on the next move. And I hope I explained everything well and you understood what is going on in Quant's price chart. Anyway, if you found any value in my content, I would really appreciate if you like this video and consider subscribing to my channel and follow me on Twitter. And if you want more, maybe you want a complete analysis for your own specific crypto, or maybe you want to learn some decent TA in order to be able to make good money in the markets, you can become a member and ask me anything you want. And until the next update, I hope you have a wonderful time with your family and loved ones. Goodbye.